Hello, everybody. Welcome to this virtual Brussels Playbook Live with Irene Tinagli, the member of the European Parliament and chair of the ECON Committee of the Committee on Economic and Financial Affairs in the European Parliament. We're all live and we're all unmuted, except for my colleague Bjarke Smith-Meyer, who I invite to do so and to join us here. Here you are. Super. My name is Florian Eder, and I'm the author of Politico's morning email called Brussels Playbook. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all here today on Zoom and other platforms for this 45 minutes of a virtual live interview with Irene Tinagli. With me is my colleague Bjarke Smith-Meyer.
Good morning, everyone.
Who is our expert reporter on the issues that we are going to talk about today, which is mainly economic recovery of Europe after or in the middle of the coronavirus crisis. Some housekeeping. You can ask your questions, please, via the Q&A tool in Zoom. Do not use any other tools, as we're not going to be able to monitor all of them at the same time. And you are very much encouraged, of course, to tweet about this live interview. There's a hashtag called Politico Tinagli, and at events Politico is our events team Twitter handle in case you want to include them. As I said, we are talking as EU countries blaze the trail towards ending the strictest lockdown measures across Europe. And as they think about how to get the economy going again. But first of all, Irene Tinagli, onorevole, buongiorno. You join us from Milan today, where, so from Italy, one of the countries that has been hit hardest by the coronavirus crisis, the health crisis itself, and where from today there's an easing of the lockdown measures in place. So how's the mood, how's the feeling in Milan this morning?
Well, I'd have to go out to tell you, I'm afraid I won't be able to get out today. So, no, there is a lot of excitement. Actually, we've been seeing more people on the streets already in the last few days. People start to be tired. 2 months in lockdown is a long, long time. But at the same time, I see a lot of, people are cautious. They're afraid of, that things could revert. So we need to be very careful. And I think everybody's been very responsible. Everybody's been very responsible. So I'm confident that we won't see massive, people on the street. I hope that we will be able to handle that responsibly.
Let's come to the core of what we wanted to talk about today. Commissioner Gentiloni keeps saying that that recovery fund will be 1.5 trillion euros heavy. From your point of view and from the European Parliament's point of view, is that approximately the right number? Is it a good number? Is it enough?
This is more or less what we had in mind, what we were asking for, something between 1 trillion and 1.5. These are actually the amounts that other experts have been saying. However, I also think that we have to follow up the developments of the crisis. So I think on Wednesday, maybe the Commission will have will brief us with, have some information on how the needs will be, the impact has been on the member states. So this will also help us in case to review that numbers, because we've seen from the very beginning, you start with a number and then week by week you have to be more ambitious because the impact is heavier than you thought. So definitely I think that would be the right starting point for the moment, but we have to be ready. We have to be ready. I mean, this crisis could be longer than we thought.
On that point, though, I mean, the idea of us having to be ready, I mean, the headline figure of 1.5 trillion always sounds great and looks good on newspaper headlines. But I mean, there has been some mumbling inside of the council, especially France, for example, or some other southern countries, that this can't be, quote unquote, funny money. This has to be sort of real cash that can actually be provided for rather than mobilizers or using leverage or anything else like that. I mean, where do you stand on that idea?
Well, I think we have to be very careful, and the Commission will be very helpful to make sure that this is indeed fresh money. I mean, we cannot afford a makeup in the budget that will just redirect some funds from one voice to the other. I mean, that's what we did with the existing, at the very beginning of the crisis. We didn't have any tool. What we did, we used what we had left in the budget to allow also, we allowed member states to reuse the unspent structural funds with flexibility. We used everything. We did all of that. But I think for the future, if we really want to enhance Europe's resilience and ability to cope with this crisis, we need to be very, strong in the kind of the response, very serious, and put a lot of resources, fresh resources. Of course, there will be also a lot of a redesigning of what, of existing programs. I mean, we can't pretend that we'll do business as usual. So there will be some redesigning of what is existing, but we can't think that that's it, that will be enough.
One of the other big sort of debates on this is just how do you then legally, I mean, I'm not assuming that you can come up with the legal explanation for it, but I mean, every institution has their own lawyers to figure out that. But I mean, there's also been a big debate as to, do you provide loans versus grants? And I mean, there are all sorts of ideas, like the loans, for instance, could be in perpetuity. I mean, they're unlimited in time, maturity isn't there, and countries can sort of pay as they like. Now, I don't know whether that's what happens. We have to see what the Commission comes up with. But there's been a big debate as to how can you legally then come up with money that you can hand off in fresh grants, especially if you need to reach the level of 1.5 trillion euros. I mean, you've had plenty of meetings with officials. I mean, has anyone sort of come up with a reasonable idea of how you can do that?
There are many ideas that are being discussed right now. So I think it's hard. I can't say which one they will go for. We will have to see what the Commission, the decisions that will be taken. But I think that there are the instruments to do that within the current treaties. Of course, what you will have to make sure, for example, if you want to, we also have to see how this recovery fund and plan will be linked to the MFF. What kind of additional resources we want to put into the MFF. We are talking about expanding the headroom within the MFF, pushing up the ceiling of own resources so we can have room for the guarantees needed to the emission of bonds. And I think that would be key. So the bond emission will be key to gather a lot of resources on the market. There is also a debate, of course, in terms of not only on resources, bonds, or member states' contribution, but also in terms of potential fiscal revenues. This is better than I do. This is a long debate and discussion in Brussels. And so we've been doing this even prior to the crisis. Maybe this is the time we can push this debate a little bit forward. So if the EU budget could rely on some fiscal capacity and resources, this could also enhance the possibility of having a large recovery fund that also is allocated through grants and not only through loans. Now, we have three ways of allocating money within the EU. We have loans, we have guarantees, which is actually what the EIB, for example, is doing, what the Juncker plan was doing through guarantees, for example, but there are also grants. So we already have programs that allocate resources through grants. And I think that if we really want a recovery fund to be, to really impact and to really give the ability to member states to react properly and to allow a recovery with lower divergences instead of growing divergences within the EU, we will need grants. We can't only allocate money exclusively through loans, because we know that in the end, loans will still have, make the debt increase, the national debts increase, and these will put pressure on a bunch of other, variables we've seen in the past, and we don't want to see that again. So we have to be very careful not to make mistakes this time, and to balance the instruments that we put in place. Of course, depending on the instruments that we put in place, depending on the amount of the resources, we change. It could change the legal basis. There are several articles that could be put in place, but I think we can do that. From what I've heard, I mean, I'm not a jurist, but from what I've heard, there is a room of maneuver in the treaties.
What's your idea of how big should the portion of grants versus loans be? Is that are we talking about 5%, 20%, 50%? Do you have
I don't know. It will also depend on the size, of course. It will also depend on the scope or what you direct them to. I would also like to see this forecast on Wednesday. This assessment that the Commission has done on the member states. We need to see that. We need to really understand how are the risks of divergences within the EU, because we are really playing with fire. We have to be very careful. There are states that will be heavily indebted, that will not have the fiscal capacity to support their economic and industrial systems as other. So we will have also to do an assessment, of the potential divergences within the EU to really understand how much grants. So I don't like to have pre-packaged recipes, because I would like to see the numbers. But I think we have to be ready and accept the fact that, of course, this should be grants that are directed, that should be linked to specific kind of, interventions to measures. It's not just, giving out money, but we need this assessment to see what kind of positions the countries, the member states are, what kinds of needs they have, what kind of, what is their macroeconomic conditions right now, what could happen. And then we can, have an estimate of how many grants are needed and where should we target these measures. I think we need to be, of course, very targeted and precise, as we can be precise in an unprecedented situation like this. There's always a margin of error.
As you say, this is really unprecedented. We're talking about unprecedented amounts of money already. 1.5 trillion is quite a lot of money. Do you sense there is a debate about where this money should come from in the long run? Now, the question is, do we need a debate on how to grow out of this crisis and how to help the countries that eventually will, shoulder parts of this burden, to grow out of this crisis again? It's not that only a few countries are going to be hit by this crisis, but even the big industrial beasts in Europe are pretty heavily under pressure in these days. So do we need a new European growth strategy, and how would that possibly could be able to look like?
Yeah, I think we need, first of all, we need to unite strong EU strategy on how to get out of this, because definitely, the response to the COVID crisis, it cannot be the sum of the individual member states' responses. So I think this is very clear right now. We can't simply rely on their individual responses. We need a European response. And right now, it should be directed in helping these countries. I mean, we've started doing that. So, for example, the program SURE that was proposed by the Commission and then approved by the Eurogroup first and the Council on April 23 is a program that's quite new also in its ambition. So creating a fund that is financed by the emission of bonds, European bonds, that goes to support, to give money, loans to the countries to support basically social expenditure, which is quite new for the European Union. We start to realize that we also need to expand the scope of European responses and intervention. So social expenditure in the terms of support to employment. I think we will need to do a lot of that, and in the next months realize that European response and intervention cannot just be infrastructure or or the oldest conception of strategic investment. Right now, for example, spending in healthcare is a strategic investment. Supporting employment in the countries is a strategic investment, because we prevent from creating a massive unemployment that could be very hard to reverse. Of course, it's a bet in the sense that we are betting that the crisis will not last too long. So it is up to us also trying to make it shorter and trying to balance these variables. So I think that Europe has to have a strategy, first of all, how to address the emergency now. And then, of course, it will have to think in terms of the growth, as you said, what will come afterwards, because how will we address the new, the single market will be, very much changed from what we are seeing today, for example. For the new framework on state aid will really change the face and the structure of the single market. How are we going to handle that? How we are going to avoid distortions, how we are going to actually reunite and make the single market stronger to recreate a level playing field, how we are going to address industrial policies in the European Union, because what we are seeing these weeks, every country is trying to pursue their own policies to support their industries. I don't think that in the future, Europe, can refrain from having a European vision that is stronger, that is a little bit more incisive, trying to affect the growth. There absolutely. These are all things that we have to design right now. Of course, it's not easy, because handling the emergency on one hand and on the other, planning for the future. But I think that's exactly what we have to do. And of course, also remind us the overarching priorities. So the single market, the level playing field, the stability of the euro area, and these are the things that should be also the commitments that we made on the environment. We shouldn't forget that.
No, yeah, I want to jump on that before. We're all very mindful of time. So before we move on to the sort of next segment of what we've planned for this interview, the one thing I'd love to then ask on, and building on what you just said, is the idea of a green economy. And it's a question that I think that you'd be very well suited to sort of theorize about a little bit, because you've spoken to many policymakers, finance ministers, commissioners. Also, you come from a country which is highly indebted and will only come out of this crisis with more debt. Now, one of the big critiques that come with the idea that we need to push hard for a green recovery is that green initiatives, and this is stuff that I hear from other indebted countries, not necessarily yours, and it takes years to plan these green initiatives, and that we can't be short-sighted, naive, and say, yes, we're going to go green. We need to go for anything that basically gives us growth. And I ask you, in your position, where do you stand on that?
Well, I don't completely agree. I see the need for some margin of flexibility in the emergency right now, but frankly, I don't see how this conflicts with the longer term view. Actually, we will have an extraordinary chance now that we are rebuilding. There are entire sectors that will have to be rebuilt, that will get public grants or public money, and this is an amazing opportunity to have these sectors, but at the same time to help them to be rebuilt on a greener basis, on a plan for a longer term. If we forget everything about that, if we allow massive investments to take place in the next year or two that completely neglects climate and the environment, we will be locked with these choices for decades. And so I think this would be really short-sighted, and then it will explode in our face in 20 years, which is not, or even earlier than that, probably 10 years. And then we would look back and say, what did we do? We missed that opportunity. So I think, of course, in the short term, right now, there has to be a little bit of flexibility, but we shouldn't lose track of the long-term view that we had a few months ago. climate change issues have not changed. They're still there, and they will be there once we go back to normal economic and industrial activities. So I think this is an opportunity not to forget that goals with a little bit of flexibility right now, but not. I know that there are political parties that they say just scrap everything, but I frankly don't agree with them.
Speaking about the future and speaking about the crisis as an opportunity, as you just put it, or as a chance or also as a risk, there's people who say, this crisis could be, perhaps this crisis is deep enough for some deep change to happen in the Eurozone, also in the setup of the Eurozone and the decision-making process in the Eurozone and all. I would like to invite you to a rapid-fire round of questions where basically a yes or no is enough for you to say as an answer. Bjarke and I will share a little bit, and after that we come to the next theme, as Bjarke said. So fast forward, let's say 5 years from today, is the 60% debt to GDP ratio in the Stability and Growth Pact still in place?
How long?
5 years.
I mean, that's too long right now. That's too long to know. I really don't know. I mean,
Bjarke.
All right, okay, we'll accept that. Will the Eurozone still be intact?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, I cannot think. I mean, I don't have that ability. I cannot think that it wouldn't be in place. I think we are working to keep in place, and I'm sure we will make it and we will manage.
Is there going to be a European finance minister 5 years from now?
Maybe. I hope so.
Hopeful answer so far. I like this. Will we have a thing called the Eurobond?
Sorry?
Will we have in 5 years something called the Eurobond?
Not with that name. I've learned the lesson, so I know what are the names that we cannot use. But this whole debate on the Eurobond is kind of crazy, because there are already many European bonds with different names, with no names. We are, we do have emissions of bonds in the European Union. And so, of course, the notion of Eurobond as something that covers everything, that neutralize the whole debt of the union, it might be a little bit ambitious, but we might have different instruments more targeted to the needs of the European Union of today and the next few years for the recovery. That I think so.
Will we have a financial transaction tax across the EU, the EU 27?
We could have. I mean, if we really want to get out of this situation, we'll have to make progress also on taxation. If, it could be something that helps the European Union to have the resources to enhance its intervention, his instruments. It would also reduce the volatility of certain markets, the speculation. I think it could, I don't see why not. There is
sticking on the theme of tax, do you think that we'll have a minimum corporate rate tax as is being discussed on the global stage right now?
You are testing my optimism today. Okay. But I warn you, I am an optimistic person. So, that was not the debate and the negotiation that were taking place at the OECD level were not that bad in the past few months on that front. So why not? I mean, we might go there. If not really, really there, we might be certainly closer than we are today.
One last one on your optimism. Will Matteo Salvini be Italy's prime minister in 5 years?
I told you, I'm an optimistic, so I think no. No, I don't know. I mean, Italian politics is really, if there's one hard thing to predict, is how things will go in the Italian politics. So I really don't know. I really cannot, I really don't know. I think this crisis put pressure on that kind of way of doing politics. So his I think people start to realize that policy making is a little bit more complex, and that you can't simply oversimplify everything in a tweet or in a, it's, I think that people are learning. It's a learning process. Crises are always have a learning process for everybody, not just for policymakers. I think for citizens as well.
We'll definitely get back to that once we get to sort of the final stages of our chat today. But the one big topic I do want to talk to you about, especially is your role as chairwoman of ECON, which, is definitely a heavyweight in the parliament. I mean, I think trying to gauge the parliament's role in this crisis is a big question. And I'd love for you to sort of help me through this. I mean, as far as I'm aware right now, we've had 2 public hearings, or virtual public hearings, I should say, with the likes of Dombrovskis, the Commissioner, Executive Vice President Dombrovskis, and then your compatriot, Paolo Gentiloni, who's the Commissioner for Economy. You've had, however, a lot of very, very, well, I guess they're secret, behind closed doors meetings with some very impressive headliners. I mean, you've spoken to the ECB president, Christine Lagarde, to name one, the finance ministers of Spain, Germany, and Italy, the chief of the Eurozone's bailout fund, Klaus Regling, and the executive vice president, Margrethe Vestager. Now, these are fascinating personalities that I know that we at Politico would love to have covered, but also I think the public would have been very interested to have known what they were thinking. What was your reasoning behind keeping those meetings in camera, as they're called?
Well, we started this series of hearings at the very beginning of the crisis, and Parliament still didn't have the platform actually to hold hearings on remote for the whole ECON, from everyone connected from remote. So, but I thought it was really important for the Parliament and for the ECON committee to be in the process, to be up to speed with everything that was being decided in the European institutions, and also to make the voice of the European citizens heard by these people who were making very important decisions for the European Union. And so at the beginning, it was actually a sort of, contingency situation. And then when we continued and we got the platform, we started to have public hearings. We had Centeno, we had Dombrovskis, we had Gentiloni, but still there are some hearings that are kept in camera simply because in a moment like this, you know better than I do that sometimes there could be declarations, words, or small phrases that could have a very strong impact on the markets, on sovereign debt, on the spreads. And we want to be free to express our opinions to these policymakers, to hear their opinion, to know exactly what the situation is. But we don't want to create stress on the markets. We don't want to create these kinds of problems. So I think that we try to make this distinction when we feel that there could be a risk that we create that some things could be said that put a stress on the markets. We keep it in camera. I think it's a matter of responsibility. I mean, it's not a lack of transparency, because we say to everybody who we are talking to, so everything is clear. When we have something to say about how the hearings went, and if we have something to communicate, we have public statements. They are on our website. But
they're limited, right? I mean, these public statements are limited in themselves. I mean, I feel like in a way you're setting a precedent, like, I mean, what can we then define as sensitive? Of course, now we're talking about market sensitivity, but if we start introducing many more in-camera meetings than we do public meetings, then there is a lot that the public want to know, but then can't know. And I mean, the groups, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, that the meetings that you have with these individuals, these policymakers, are, I think there are 6 or 7 of you, right? It's the coordinators of ECON that sit there. So, I mean, to what extent are you setting a precedent that actually makes the system more opaque than it is anything else?
No, I mean, we in-camera meetings have already, always taken place. I mean, it's not the first time. So every time that there could be sensitive information, the meetings are kept in camera. We've done already several public hearings. The problem is also because I've taken all the information, because we will have upcoming hearings that we would like to make public, of course, is that we have limited slots for public hearings and for, you know, ECON, because the platforms that the Parliament has put in place don't allow all the commissions to have, because also there are translation that has to be in place, at least in 5 or 6 languages. There are, you know, technical instruments. So unfortunately, we don't have that many slots because Parliament is working, you know. I mean, and I think this is something we should be saying more. The European Parliament is fully at work, you know, all the committees are working, the Parliament is working, we've been voting, you know, we will have a plenary in a few days, another plenary in June. So we are making an unprecedented effort for us, for our IT services, and unfortunately, we don't have that many slots. So we have to be selective.
Just very finally on this particular point, and then we'll move on. Will you be publishing anything like an overall statement or analysis of what you learned later when markets are more calm, then from your interactions in camera?
Me personally, or
you or the legal? Oh, I don't know, the ECON itself, the press people that you have working there, the press officers. I mean, will anyone publish anything on it?
The coordinators. I mean, if I don't know if that could be of use, because the coordinators, basically, they do represent their political group. So what happens is that after every meeting that we have, in camera, out camera, the coordinators, they talk to the members of their political group, so they update them. So there is this line of, you know, transmission and involvement of all the members of the Parliament in what we do. But so that's why we didn't think of, you know, doing one single report, because the individual groups, they do have updates in their own groups. But I mean, this is something we could do. I mean, we have a lot of work.
Yeah.
I mean, but actually, you know what? When we work on the resolutions, for example, the Parliament resolution that we voted in April 17, lots of ideas and exchange of views that we had in the ECON committee ended up there, because you know, the reflections and proposals and ideas that we exchanged there were then used in our official documents like the resolution. So I don't know if the Parliament will decide to have another resolution in the future. I hope so, because I think the voice of the Parliament is important. I understand.
I'd like to ask you on that point. I mean, the voice of the Parliament and resolutions, you mentioned the plenaries coming up. Interestingly, so far, though, the crisis management has been very limited to the Council. You know, we've been using this Article 122 for the initiative you mentioned before, SURE, or the unemployment reinsurance scheme, 100 billion figure, also through guarantees and leveraging, but still, you know, a big initiative in itself. If Parliament got no say in that, and if, as we understand, we have yet to see what the Commission proposes, but if the recovery fund is done on very similar legal grounds of Article 112, that also ostracizes the Parliament in this. So I ask you, I mean, in this crisis handling situation, what is the role of the Parliament?
I think it's been an important role. I mean, for example, on the recovery fund and the recovery plan, up until mid-April, it was just one of the hypotheses that a few member states had put in place. Other member states were very against it. And then there was our resolution where we showed that actually the Parliament voted with a great majority a recovery fund that was supposed to be financed with recovery bonds. So we gave clear directions. And I like to think that the reason why the Council on the 23 managed to find an agreement that, yes, we are going to have this recovery fund, and the Commission is going to, and this was also, and it will also be related to the MFF. So I'm sure that the recovery fund will have you know, a stronger link with the Parliament. The Parliament will have a much more of a say on this plan because of the relationship with the MFF and with the EU budget. So this will also give us more power on this next instrument. So of course, we all know that the role of Parliament has been increasing over time, that we always trying to increase our role. But I think it is important. It's been important in these weeks, I believe. And I think it will be more important in the next weeks and months, especially if, as it seems, the recovery fund will be related to the MFF and the EU budget. But this, of course, will give us a lot of voice on it. So we will make sure we will use it.
I'd like to come to our viewers' questions and would like you to answer them, of course. I'll just start with Lisa Cunha from Action Ad. Mrs. Tinagli, what role do you see for tax transparency and in particular public country-by-country reporting when it comes to COVID recovery? Is that going to be a tool of recovery?
Well, as I said, I do believe that we will have to go towards a stronger fiscal harmonization, also to give the EU some fiscal capacity. So yes, I think that country-by-country reports would be an important instrument in this framework, and not the only one, but an important instrument. I mean, I was disappointed that in November the Council toned it down for a small margin, but I hope this can be put back on the table and be part of this new policies at the EU level that we can adopt in the next months.
There's another policy question. Considering COVID, of course, what about the Capital Markets Union? Is that going to be a future priority also of the ECON committee?
Yes, we actually had some initiatives upcoming that now we had to delay because of the crisis, but I do believe this will be very important, especially for the recovery phase. The European Union will need not only to put in place a lot of public resources, of course, and grants and loans to the governments, but we will have to be attractive for investments. We will have to make sure that the Capital Markets Union functions well. And right now there are still lots of things to do on that side. But I think also Vice President Dombrovskis and Commissioner Gentiloni also recognize that. So I totally agree. We have to make progresses. We think about that because that would be crucial for the next, for the recovery of the EU economy. So definitely we will be working on that as soon as, we have the opportunity.
There's one more, I think, but you answered already. Do we need a bigger role for a social Europe? I think we talked about that. But there's a specific one, is about students. Many students in the middle of this crisis will not be able to pay their tuition fees and pursue professional opportunities through Erasmus. Is that something that the EU should be busy with? Should make itself busy with? Should think about solutions?
I think so. I think this is, thank you for raising this point, because it's true. It's something that it's not very much addressed in the debate, in the public debate. That is true. So thank you for bringing this up. We think about firms, we think about workers. We don't think enough about students, but actually students are very much impacted by this crisis. So both those that are still in school, those who are entering the job market right now. So I think this is something that we should be thinking on and working on. And now actually would be a good time to do it as we trying to finalize the negotiations on the MFF. I think that would be a perfect place to put in place some instruments to support students, or at least to make sure to have instruments to support member states and make sure member states, support member states in these kinds of policies.
I've got one last question from you, our viewers. Henk-Jan Orbe is not sharing your optimism. He says, anyways, he's got a question. Why not try to establish European Airways?
Sorry?
Why not try to establish a European airline, European Airways?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's the governance would be quite challenging, I guess. Look, I think that there are many ways. I know that the airline industry is already suffering a lot, will suffer a lot. In Italy, actually, we are basically, supporting and nationalizing Alitalia. Other countries probably will move in that kind of direction. But I think there are many other instruments to make sure that the airlines guarantee their services on one hand, but at the same time, it remains a competitive market. We have to be very careful. On one hand, I do share the concerns and the needs to support strategic industries, to support our productive base. On the other hand, though, I'm a little bit worried about what will happen to our, level playing field, to the functioning of our markets if we recreate many monopolies, whether they are at the national or European level. I think this is something we have to think through very, very carefully, and to see if we really, at what conditions we need that. Definitely, as I told you, we will see, or at least we will have to see, a stronger intervention of the European Union in industrial policies, in supporting the industries and identifying which sectors need a little bit of support. We've already done measures to support the airlines, for example, but trying also to protect the single market and the competition in the union. I don't know. I mean, I think we will have to be very careful and evaluate every single measure very carefully.
Thank you for that. I think we have a few more minutes left. And before we wrap up, we would love to ask you a few things about the country you know best, Italy, as it is often an enigma, let me say, to many other Europeans. Bjarke, do you want to give it a go?
Yeah, I think, a really good one to start off with is that, I mentioned very, very briefly earlier on that you'd spoken to Klaus Regling, the managing director of the European Stability Mechanism, which is the Eurozone's bailout arm, for those that don't know. In Italy, there is a lot of, people are pretty scared about approaching the ESM, even for what has recently been negotiated as a credit line. So an insurance policy, if you like, specifically for health-related costs in this crisis. And yet it seems from most senior politicians in Italy that even though, the finance minister, Roberto Gualtieri, and your predecessor was fighting very, very hard for these lower conditions that would be attached to this credit line, and yet they won't even use it. And I think a good question to start off with is, why is Italy so afraid of the ESM?
I think that there are two reasons, actually. One is related to political communication of certain political parties in the past year. So every country has its own, public debate, national public debate on some key words or key issues. And the ESM has been a key issue for some political parties that have been fighting against it, because it was seen as the traditional ESM instrument as a way to control the economic policies and fiscal policies of the state. So an instrument that takes away sovereignty from a country. And this has been a very strong communication on the side of many political parties. So of course, when you bring back this name, ESM, there is a lot of sensitivity. But as other countries have similar sensitivities with different words, like the word Eurobond in some Northern European countries, and the other. So, and this, I realize that may not seem to have a lot of rationality attached to it when it comes to the new credit line with no conditionality. So I think the debate also, what we've tried to do also in the public debate in Italy is trying to make people understand that this is a different credit line. On the other hand, there is another issue, another fact, is that we still don't have all the details of the new credit line within the ESM. So we have a political agreement, a political statement by the Eurogroup, And I think it's pretty clear. And from how I know the European institutions, I know that when there is a strong political statement, I mean, it has, you know, consequences on how things are written. I mean, the political agreement is important. But of course, until people don't see all the details written down and all the doubts clarified, it is difficult to clear out the debate completely. So I hope that, I think that all the details will be made known at the end of this week, if I'm not wrong. And so once we will have all the details, and if all the technical details, as I've heard, will respect the political agreement, I don't think there will be any problems. And what actually Ministro Gualtieri and the President Conte said is not, we will never use it. It's like, we will see what the conditions are, and we will do our evaluation. So I hope that we will keep this approach and be very, you know, open-minded, very rational.
I mean, rational and open-minded. I think it's
notion again of.
Yeah, go. Well, okay, all right. I'll throw it in just quickly. You know, because I think one of the interesting things is that it's not the first time that you know, Matteo Salvini, we didn't mention him before, but he is one of the people who's really kind of been spurring this fear of the ESM. He was also the man behind the Eurozone being unable to agree on certain important updates to the ESM around Christmas time that actually would have made the Eurozone a lot stronger. And that message, fear, was then translated through Gualtieri into the Eurogroup. And it's not the first time that we've seen populism affecting, you know, people who should have a cooler head and be able to go through with this. So, I mean, can we expect that the Italian government will, you know, still be as jumpy as it has been?
I don't think it's been jumpy. I think that there were aspects, actually, when Gualtieri put the negotiations on hold was actually because he wanted to have the complete package, because there were other things that were being discussed at the time. And there were other things regarding, for example, the banking union. So we would have liked to see some progresses, not just on the ESM, but on other issues to complete the package, because sometimes that's what happened in the European Union. We start saying we want to change A, B, C, and D. That's a nice package. And then we change A, and then we say we'll change B tomorrow, and then tomorrow becomes in a month, becomes in 1 year. So I think it was a way for the minister to keep the package together and make sure that we could make progress on all fronts, on all accounts. So I don't think it was particularly jumpy. I mean, of course, when you have a political party that now is also in the government that has this kind of priors on the ESM and these issues, you have to work a little bit more cautiously and wait to see all the details. I think that compared to how the debate was 1 month ago, 2 months ago, I think now has flattened out a little bit and is a little bit more, you know, rational. So I don't think we should expect, but I told you I'm an optimistic. So.
One last question on this, because I think that we need to wrap it up indeed. I would agree that if you look at what the Italian government did over the past 4 weeks, probably they inch closer towards a rational debate, or towards accepting whatever is the outcome of whatever is the compromise. But if you look at the opinion polls, for example, the core pro-European parties in Italy, and that includes your own Social Democratic Party, Partito Democratico, are more and more marginalized. And if you look at the polls, those who are super successful are two right-wing parties. Is the strategy to talk people through the details of a proposal and tell them, look, if you look closely, the populist argument doesn't even, they don't even have a point. Is that really going to save the political debate in Italy, and is it going to save the political parties, including your own, from being totally marginalized?
I hope so, because I don't see what the alternative could be. I don't think that you can beat anti-European populism with a pro-European kind of populism without explaining exactly what it is about. I think especially in this time of great uncertainty, of great crisis, where nobody has the perfect recipe, the perfect answer, I don't think that coming out to citizens saying, you have to trust me because that's how I say. I mean, you have to trust me because I say so. I saw the details. I don't need to explain the details to you. Just trust me. Honestly, I don't like this way of approaching, in general, the crisis. I think we have to be transparent. We cannot have the truth on everything in these times, especially. Things are going to be hard. We are going to make, all of us sacrifices to suffer, the economy, families, and we don't have the silver bullet, the magic recipe. The only thing that we can really do is being transparent, tell things as they are, telling the truth to people, and I think this is a way to gain their trust. I think they are starting, as I said earlier, I think they're starting to realize that sometimes the propaganda, the simplified message, or Salvini is actually going down in the polls, and because it's been very erratic. Yes, Giorgia Meloni is going up, but she has had a less erratic behavior, more responsible on certain aspects, and I think people appreciate that. But now let's see. Let's see how it goes. I mean, of course, this is my approach. This is the way I'm used to do politics, which is, I don't know if it's the best way or not. I know it's the way I like to do that. I couldn't do it otherwise. I couldn't tell people, just, I don't need to tell you why. I don't need to explain. I like to explain people. I hope that could help.
On that note, I will not do my own takeaways, but I'll leave the last word to you on that optimistic note. That people one day will understand and want to look into what policy actually is about, rather than believing people who tell them that there's only one way of looking at the world. Irene Tinagli, I thank you very much for this interview, for being with us for the past 50 minutes on my behalf, on Bjarke's behalf too, and on Politico's behalf, of course. So thank you very much for that. To you out there, I see that you're still with us in great numbers. If you've got feedback, you can send an email to events@politico.eu. That is much welcome, because it helps us to make future events, in particular events like this. This is pretty new, even better in the future. And we will be, we'll host more of these events. Look at our events website, and otherwise you, of course, will be the first to know if you're a loyal playbook reader. Thank you very much to all of you. See you again soon. Irene, I hope to see you again soon in person here in Brussels or in beautiful Milan. Stay strong.
I'm looking forward.
And goodbye.
Grazie mille. Ciao.